This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I am Gilad Halpern.
And I'm Dalia Shenlin. I'm your co-host together with Gilad, and we'll be talking every week about literature, research and ideas that have caught our attention. Our guest today is Yonathan Mizrachi. He's the executive director of Emek Shaveh. It's an organization that undertakes, and I'm quoting from your website, to prevent the politicization of archaeology in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and to protect ancient sites that belong to members of all communities, faiths, and peoples. Yonathan will be speaking at an event at the Leer Institute next week, which will be dedicated to UNESCO and the concept of World Heritage from a local perspective, focusing on Israel and Jerusalem. What's more, Emek Shaveh has just published an incredibly detailed report this month in English and in Hebrew about what is actually the beating heart of this conflict, the Temple Mount or Haram el-Sharif. It's called the Temple Mount, Haram el-Sharif, Archaeology in a Political Context. Yonathan Mizrachi, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me ask you, just in a general way, Emek Shaveh, explain to us what Emek Shaveh is. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you seeking to advance one form of conflict resolution, one direction of what should happen in terms of this region reaching some form of peace?
Yes, I mean, we're definitely looking for or trying to reach for a political solution. We are an NGO. We see the archaeology is actually been used as a political tool. We're mostly trying to challenge the nationalistic aspects of archaeology, which is very, very dominant in Jerusalem especially, but not only in Jerusalem. That's actually our focus.
So not only Jerusalem, where else do you look at archaeology?
I think all over Jerusalem, archaeology is a political tool. From the beginning of Zionism, but that's a long story, and maybe from the beginning of colonialism also. But we're focusing a lot in Jerusalem, sometimes in the West Bank, which is also being used today. But Jerusalem is a major part of our work, actually.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I would just like to know whether you think that archaeology is ipso facto politicized. Can you really discuss about de-politicizing archaeology, especially in such a charged environment? How do you pick and choose, really?
And I have to add to this because it's really the same question that I have, which is archaeology always part of a nationalist or nation-building agenda? I mean, I think of other conflicts where we have, for example, in Cyprus, when the Turkish army came in, the first thing they did was destroy a bunch of, ancient Greek ruins.
Oh, and the Taliban and ISIS.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, can you ever divorce archaeology from politics anywhere in the world? Is it just about Zionism and colonialism?
No, obviously, archaeology and politics, like I said, it began together, like going together. You cannot separate them. It's based on that archaeology is not an exact science, and archaeology is something that deals with land. I mean, you're doing the excavation or a survey on a land, on a space that many times is under kind of a conflict, at least in our case, but also the other cases that you mentioned, like Cyprus and others. And this is why we have many cases that archaeology is used as a political tool, by the way, also in Europe, not necessarily just in Afghanistan and others. But still, I think there's a unique case when it comes to Israel in general, because archaeology is also a tool to justify our belonging as Israelis to this land. And this is a bit different. I don't think that the Afghans or others really using the archaeology to justify their belonging. And that's something which is unique to our conflict.
Why do we have this desperate need to prove our belonging here?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I'm the one to answer that, but
take a step.
But I can say that I think that we are immigrant society. Eventually, 2, 3, 4 generations, one maybe, some of us, and we see ourselves as people who belongs here. Unlike maybe the Americans or the Australians and others, we believe, and we are our tradition and our culture. We understand that we've been here 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, and we came back to our land.
But it's not really archaeology per se. It's what you do with it, isn't it? I mean, if you find a certain Jewish existence underneath Haram al-Sharif, very few people contest the fact that there is a Jewish past to that part of Jerusalem. So, I don't really understand the problem with archaeology per se. It's really what you do after, no?
Obviously, it's what you do after, because archaeology is just about stones and material. They don't do anything unless you use them.
So do you work with the archaeologists or with the politicians who, like Naftali Bennett once did on TV, he took out this ancient coin and said, "We were here from time immemorial." Who's more the focus of your work?
Our focus, actually, we focus in both. Actually, and we believe that the political change will be done by politicians, not by others. Not also journalists will not change. Eventually, politicians.
We're trying. We're trying.
No,
we're having you on.
I've given up.
But the politicians are definitely. But also, I think the professional community, not necessarily just archaeologists, also planners and other, the way they use their profession in kind of places which is under conflict. About your previous question, like I said, archaeology is a science. It's not an exact science, and definitely the interpretation is very important. How you interpret the find, how you use the find, how you understand that if the history or the past belongs exclusively to you or not. And you mentioned something which, okay, let's say that tomorrow we'll find, a Jewish evidence under the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount. Some people will say it shows that the Haram al-Sharif belongs to us. Others say it shows that the Haram al-Sharif belongs still to the Muslims, and they will keep and will be even very happy and proud to have other heritage or have history layers under the Haram.
So in some ways, what I actually want to ask you is maybe you're not so much depoliticizing architecture as repoliticizing it, sort of envisioning archaeology. Yes, sorry. Envisioning what the archaeological finds as public assets that belong to everybody in this region. And are you trying to maybe generate a sense of we're all part of this collective environment because we all have historic roots here, which is just ascribing a different political identity to archaeology?
Yeah, obviously it's very true. Like we all have we all belong here eventually. We do understand that, but I think that the problem is that more and more people from both sides believe that they are exclusively belongs here. Like we definitely feel it around Jerusalem that people come and say, okay, this is our Jerusalem. It's mostly important to us. It's the most important to us, or so ever. Obviously, the other side say the same. I think this is the main issue, to understand that you cannot come and say that one layer is more important than the other. It doesn't matter, or maybe that one layer is more, it belongs to you than the other. That's the basic of what we think should be understood among the Israeli public, at least.
And there does seem to be a tendency not only to say this belongs to us on each side, but also for each side to work on proving that parts of Jerusalem do not belong to the other side.
Yeah, again, I'll try to give you the short example. Yesterday I talked to school students in Tel Aviv, actually. We talked about City of David, like an archaeological site, which people understand as used to be the capital of ancient Judea, actually, Israel, Judea, David King. And then we talked also about another site which is located in north of Tel Aviv, which is Tel Kasila. It's located today in the Tel Aviv Museum. And Tel Kasila is actually a Philistine site. And then you come and say, okay, Philistine side doesn't mean it belongs to the Palestinians and the Judean side belongs to us. So should we give back, maybe we should do an exchange, Tel Aviv instead of Jerusalem? Obviously, we're not talking about that. So.
Sort of form of originalism. Yeah. Let's go into your report. Tell us about some of the examples. The report on the Temple Mount in Haram al-Sharif has many different aspects of the archaeological processes and digs going on, or maybe I shouldn't call them digs because they're different forms of activities. Can you give us a few examples of the aspects that are covered in that report?
I think that today the main activity that we see that happening around the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount is actually, first of all, is archaeological activity in general. And some of the excavation already done in the 60s and the 70s, but there are also many ongoing excavation, especially underground excavations of tunnels under the Muslim Quarter, which surrounding the Temple Mount and raising a lot of tension, obviously among the Muslims, but other people as well. This is definitely what's very concerning. We also see something which is very interesting, archaeological projects that eventually succeeded to change the character of Silwan, a village which located southern to the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. And more people can come and say, okay, they identify Silwan with City of David. And I think archaeology has an important role in making that. So I think that's the main thing that we are covering in the report.
Would you say that archaeology is instrumentalized by both sides in the same way, by the Israelis as well as the Palestinians? Do you treat the politicization of archaeology on both sides in equal measure?
Actually, I wish I could say that because that will make my work maybe easier. I could say both of them treat them equally, but I think it's not actually. Unfortunately, it's not, because I think there's a different, like we said before. Eventually, we are the Israelis. We are immigrant society. The Palestinians are not immigrant society. By the feeling, based on what I understand and by what I see, I mean they part of this land. They don't even need to use the archaeology to justify that they've been here 1,000 years ago and so on. I mean, you just have to look at the walls of the old city or the mosques. At the same time, it's definitely becoming more politicized by both sides, and politicians are very good by politicizing everything. And we see more and more Palestinians, leaders or politicians, claims all kind of statements, or saying all kind of statements which definitely are irrelevant or definitely are not helping to the conflict.
But are there actually Palestinian nationalists, in inverted commas, archaeologists working on the ground trying to establish? I mean, is it really part of their political culture in any way?
And maybe in order to understand that, you can remind us of who actually controls the site, because the Waqf is also in control of Haram al-Sharif, and explain for our listeners how that works, which will help to answer Gilad's question.
So actually, more or less everything is controlled by Israel, except of the holy places, which is the Holy Sepulchre, which under the Christians and Israel trying to avoid working there. And there's the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount, which is under the Islamic Waqf, with Jordanian involvement and so on. And the Islamic Waqf more or less responsible to what's happening in the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif, and is definitely not the right body to protect the archaeology based on its history. We all remember the damage that was done during the late 90s by the Islamic Waqf. So they definitely have a responsibility to some of the parts. So like I said, I mean, you cannot come and say that, eventually the one who has more land can influence much more.
Right, so it's the fact that Israel is in charge that makes it more powerful. I mean, the disparity of power exists in this regard as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't help but try to relate this to, very, very current political developments. In October of 2016, we had this very important resolution by UNESCO where it referred to the developments and the politicization that you're talking about of the region, referring only to the holy site only as Haram al-Sharif. The Israeli government's position was that this completely denies the Jewish connection to the Temple Mount. You are a more objective person who understands these things because you are an archaeologist. Where do you fall out about that UNESCO resolution? Do you agree with the Israeli government's perspective, or do you think it was correct to refer to it as Haram al-Sharif?
I think this is a good example where politics and heritage mixed, obviously, with UNESCO. I think UNESCO resolution, like at least 80 or 90% of what it says is very relevant and very important, like how to protect and preserve Jerusalem as a World Heritage Site, which means prevent building new structures, thinking about the excavation and the damage they are doing, and things like that. But UNESCO resolution also ignored the Jewish history, or kind of not mentioned enough the Jewish history, the Jewish link to some of the places, definitely the Temple Mount and the Western Wall. And that actually was very much used by politicians, which I think, by the way, UNESCO did a mistake by not understanding how important and how eventually it's beyond even just being a holy, the Western Wall and Plex. It's something that is so deep in the Israeli identity, I think, that by not fully recognizing that, I think they did a mistake. We also announced about it. We also wrote a letter about it and say that, okay, we definitely agree about what you said, 90% or 80% of what you said, but ignoring the Israeli Jewish feelings to these places is something that, as a body that's supposed to protect heritage, you cannot do.
Okay. So this was Emek Shaveh's formal position?
Yes.
You wrote this letter to UNESCO.
Yes,
did they respond to you?
They respond, but it was kind of, I think, it was about, they had a flood of all kind of letters, for you can imagine how many people,
But how many more authoritative than you? I mean, a group of archaeologists.
Yeah, but we don't need the immediate response. What is important for us, and I think UNESCO did very well, is that the relevant project will be criticized. Like I said, the tunnels that have been excavated under the old city should be criticized and should be measured in a way if it really helps to the archaeology or not, which we think it's not. The idea or the plans to build a new touristic center in the old city is definitely that should be criticized. And that in that way, we definitely agree with the UNESCO. So
okay, this of course all relates to the topic of that evening at Van Leer in a few days' time. So let's take that mini scandal and unpack it. Do you think that in this case, and maybe we can generalize here, the damage done by UNESCO outweighed the advantage that it brings? You know, UN agencies are famously ineffectual. I mean, I'm sure that UNESCO is not spared that assessment either. What does UNESCO provide here, really, other than, you know, a few reports that cause mini scandals that last for 2 days and everybody goes back to their business?
Maybe I should say something about UNESCO, because UNESCO is a big body. I mean, okay, there are many agencies, like you said, of the UN, but it's a big body which deal with different topics. Like, we are now focusing in one thing, which is the World Heritage Center. They're also dealing with education and science and things like that, and they have a lot of cooperation with the Israeli academics and others, and also with the education ministry. This is why the committee sits in the education ministry. But we are now just talking about, let's say, one body which is in UNESCO, which is the World Heritage Center. And it raises a good question, why Israel should work with this kind of body. And I can give you my opinion, but also my understanding, which is kind of in a mix. UNESCO recognizes World Heritage sites, which means like today we have sites like Masada, Akko, biblical sites, they're all recognized.
And even a neighborhood in Tel Aviv. My neighborhood in Tel Aviv, I have to say.
So some people live in a World Heritage site. If you come to the conference, you will hear that not necessarily recognition of UNESCO as a World Heritage Site means it's for the benefit of the residents, but that's something beyond. But definitely, for the state, it's something important to come and say, we are preserving our heritage. The international community recognize that. But I think also for Israel, it's very important to come, and it goes back to what I said before, that, okay, this is the history that eventually belongs to us, doesn't matter what kind of history it is, and the international community recognize our historic roots here. This is how I see why Israel is so kind of obsessed maybe sometimes with UNESCO, because with all the respect, UNESCO and other UN agencies are not really, like you said before, not very efficient, and I don't know how much powerful they are. And that's what makes UNESCO so relevant, and also because eventually this is a story about narrative. Jerusalem is a story about narrative, and this is what makes the resolution so problematic.
So you implied before, I'm not sure if you purposely implied, that they made a mistake. Do you really think it was a mistake? I mean, again, the Israeli government is arguing that this is a pattern of anti-Israel attitudes in the UN. Do you think that the people at UNESCO, who are, after all, supposed to be authorities on culture as well, really didn't know what they were doing? I
think that if you deal with Jerusalem, you have more than 90% possibility that you'll do mistakes. It's so sensitive, it's really... I can definitely understand, like, how from a long resolution, you mentioned a few things that were used by Israeli politicians. So that respect, yes, they did mistakes. We're all doing mistakes, in our statement and what we do. They could do it better.
Let me ask you this. You said earlier that you understand why Israel is cooperating with UNESCO. Why do you cooperate with UNESCO? What does it really provide you as someone who is trying desperately to depoliticize the whole issue? Don't you just bring in another player that just makes things all the more complicated?
I don't think we bring a player here. They already exist here, that UNESCO is here. I mean, because sometimes people tell to me, maybe we should involve, UNESCO should be involved in some small archaeological site in the West Bank. That's not what we are talking about. We're talking about a site that already been... I don't know who brought UNESCO to Jerusalem. It's officially the Jordanians. I'm not sure that Israel was not involved by doing the wrong actions to bring UNESCO as well. But today UNESCO is a player, if we like it or not.
So you don't like it? Is that what I'm?
No. But
you'd rather have the...
No, I think you're reading into it.
I'm just answering to your first part of what you asked me. If I'm bringing UNESCO, so I'm saying no, I'm not bringing. They exist here. The second thing, which is very important to our understand, or our policy and understanding, is that the archaeological and the historic sites of the old city eventually need to be protected by kind of a group of people or committee of people, which not be exclusively Israelis/Jews or only Israelis and Palestinians. From my understanding, I don't think that if only the Israelis will be responsible to Jerusalem or only the Palestinians will be responsible to the archaeology of Jerusalem, it will be a way to protect Jerusalem as a World Heritage Site. It doesn't matter who it will be. Eventually, the extremist groups will take over, like we see what's happening today.
Yeah, you can't trust conflicting parties to actually preserve these sites as they should.
Yes, and I don't see any objective. I don't think that if, for example, the British mandate will come again, they will be objective, because also they are involved. I mean, Jerusalem is a complicated place. So this is why we think, and that's what we suggest many times, that there will be kind of an international committee that...
But UNESCO is not helping, and perhaps not helping enough.
UNESCO can help. I mean, UNESCO can help. The question, it's not about if UNESCO is helping or not. Israel doesn't want UNESCO helps because Israel wants...
But it wants its recognition.
Yeah.
I think we have a little obsession with UNESCO for here. I want to ask you another question. I want to go back to another major important current event that's been happening over the last 2 years. In the fall of 2014, there was an outbreak of violence in Jerusalem, and it began with a wave. It touched off a wave of about a year and more of individual attacks, stabbings, and car attacks. And many people thought that many Palestinians were driven to sort of, inflammatory rhetoric and violence because of the perception that Israel was changing its what's called the status quo on the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. Can you tell us what was really happening?
First of all, I don't think anyone can say what is really happening.
So maybe there really is no truth here.
Yeah, there is no truth here, definitely. There's, I think,
only competing narratives.
No, but I think it's also about feelings, emotions and feelings, and there are facts, by the way. There are definitely a lot of activities, but there's a lot of feeling. I mean, if you look at the Israeli activity, again, what happening in Silwan, what happening in the old city, the ongoing excavation, the declarations of the politicians, the involvement of more and more people in the Temple Mount, but also around the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. So I can understand why Palestinians, especially Muslims, although not only, by the way, there's also a question about Christian and the Holy Sepulchre, but let's leave it apart now. So I can understand why Palestinians, especially Muslims, feel that the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif kind of been taken from them, if not taken from them, like being isolated from free access to them. I can definitely understand that, and since we are talking about emotions, and this is a conflict which is very relevant, so I remembered myself talking to Palestinians, which consider themselves like non-religious people, secular, or maybe even atheists, saying that when it comes to the feeling that something is that even the Haram al-Sharif is under threat, so they behave differently. Yes, I may add that we also did a poll and a survey about it among the Palestinians of East Jerusalem, and definitely mentioned that they are more concerned about archaeological activities around the Haram al-Sharif than other problems like house demolition and things like that.
Really? So your poll found that they were more concerned with a sort of symbolic, historic aspect of their lives than actually their homes being destroyed?
Yes, and also also something very interesting is like 80% of the Israelis believe that the archaeological excavation are scientific projects that are happening in East Jerusalem. 90% of the Palestinians think that the archaeological activities in East Jerusalem are a political tool, one way or another. Doesn't matter to justify Israeli presence or to destroy Muslim presence. Doesn't matter exactly the percentages, but it's very interesting.
And both of them are right?
Both of them are right. Yes. Both of them are right sometimes, yes.
Okay, I mean, there's so many other kinds of topical issues that I'd like to ask you about. I mean, one of the interesting things that's happened recently is that David Be'eri, one of the founders of a very extremist organization that's changing the archaeology of Jerusalem, or changing the politicization of the archaeology of Jerusalem, has recently it's been announced that he will be awarded the Israel Prize. Can you talk about what kinds of, how his organization has had an influence on the politicized archaeology of Jerusalem, who he is and...
I think David Be'eri, which the founder of one of the founders of Elad Association, Elad organization in East Jerusalem, it's a kind of settlers organization. So I think they were probably one of the first to understand the power of archaeology when it comes to Jerusalem. They decided in the late 90s or the middle 90s to be very much involved in archaeological excavations, archaeological projects. First of all, in order to change the character of Silwan village, which unfortunately they really succeeded in that today.
And it's changing the character historically. In other words, it's going back and saying what this is now is not what it's going to have been in the past, in a way.
Yeah, they're changing the village through the historical...
Through the history.
Through
right?
the history.
So using history to change the future. That's what I was trying to say. Gilad is giving me funny looks.
Yeah.
but to change the present also, because like the idea today is that, okay, let's explore, let's visit City of David, the historic, the ancient site, and we don't even know that we are also in a present Palestinian village. So it's very powerful tool. I think that they are very much, we do know that they're very much involved in places like Silwan and all the old city and other places around the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, or the old city in general, which are places that in the core of the conflict eventually. So I think the reason David Be'eri is actually now winning the Israeli prize and not other settler, because they succeeded to say, not, we are not just dealing with settlement, we're dealing here with
Heritage.
exploring the heritage, like we say.
Did they make any objective contribution to the archaeology of Jerusalem, or is it all entirely politicized?
I mean, from a purely archaeological perspective.
Which is objective question. No, I cannot give you an objective answer, obviously. I mean, because it's also under debate. I would dare to say that I think that the history will judge and say that most of the archaeological project, or maybe even in general, the archaeological project that taking place today in Silwan, and many of them were taking place in the old city eventually, did much more damage than contribution to the understanding of the past.
But could you imagine a situation in which those archaeological explorations that have been undertaken for politicized purpose and a right-wing politicized purpose, can you imagine a situation where the findings were put to the benefit of all the people who live there, so that each of them can claim, we are all part of this. This is part of all of our heritage, and maybe create a more harmonious society or shared society?
I definitely think we can do that. I mean, I think it's much easier than it looks, actually, sometimes. We have to understand that today archaeologists can become like a kind of the obsession in Jerusalem, like they're excavating everywhere. I think also we should balance and decide where to excavate, how to preserve, and how to present Jerusalem. By the way, if you're going back to UNESCO, so they're all kind of... I'm sorry to involve them, but they are the main professional political body here. So there are all kind of conventions that were adopted by UNESCO and suggesting a way to do what you're saying, how the heritage can be presented and protected for the benefit, at least, of the most of the players or the main players.
So this is not impossible. I mean, there's plans out there in the international bodies, and I assume Emek Shaveh is also advancing this approach. Can you remind us who's in Emek Shaveh? Who are the other archaeologists?
In Emek Shaveh, we have few archaeologists. It's me. There's another one. The founders are three archaeologists, which is me, Gideon Suleimani, another archaeologist who works for the Antiquity Authority, and Rafi Greenberg from Tel Aviv University.
All Israelis, though. Or do you have any Palestinians?
We are an Israeli organization. We are all Israelis. We are not only archaeologists, I must say, in the organization. And there are also other archaeologists in the organization today, which I didn't mention the name. But we are an Israeli organization, yes. Yes.
Let me ask you another thing that is pretty general and probably our last question. Given that you're a group of experts, what would be your preferred solution for this most sensitive of areas, the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, under a peaceful resolution to the conflict, like a two-state solution or, at this point, any other kind of resolution? What do you think is the ideal approach for managing, for the sake of preserving archaeology and peace between the people?
First of all, I think that much less excavations should take place. I think we did enough. Like, if you look what happening until 67 and since 67, much less excavations. And I think when it comes to the religious places, that's what I would say, the religious places definitely have a different status. Like, I don't see a way that the Haram al-Sharif will change its status, and I don't see the way that the Western Wall will change its status. Like, I don't see a way that the Holy Sepulchre will change its status. So eventually there are things that already been set up. And then the question is, obviously, there are people who would like to change it. I just want to say that I think that if you're changing the status quo in one place, immediately it brings the question, why not to change the status quo in other places? Like, if you're changing the status quo in the Temple Mount, that is what does that mean about the Western Wall, for example, and other places as well. So it's all problematic, but when it comes to archaeology, I definitely think we have to rethink about the excavations and who
it almost makes it sound like you're saying, don't find any more things. Let's leave our history buried a little bit. It's too explosive. We can't be trusted to live in our history.
No, it's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I'm definitely questioning what we are finding now. We don't have time to talk about that. But I think we can, first of all, with what we have, we can present much more pluralistic Jerusalem.
All right. Yonathan Mizrachi, the executive director of Emek Shaveh, an organization of archaeologists trying to promote the de-politicization of archaeology in Israel and Jerusalem and other places. Thank you very much for coming in today. And the event at Van Leer, with your participation discussing UNESCO's involvement and other issues, will take place on the 28th of March at the Van Leer Jerusalem premises.
Right. And I will also remind readers that you should download the report. It's in English and Hebrew. It's called The Temple Mount Haram HaSharif, Archaeology in a Political Context. Very detailed and very interesting.
And in Arabic as well.
And in Arabic as well. I didn't even know that. Thank you for being on the show. And also a big thanks to the Van Leer Institute for their generous support. If you like this podcast, there are so many more where it came from, and you should listen to all of them. Just go to www.tlv1.fm/podcasts and take your pick. Don't forget to visit our new website, telavivreview.org. Like us on Facebook and follow on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.